All right, let's bring in our guest for this hour. Joining us, attorney and former prosecutor Randolph Rice. Randolph, great to see you as always. First and foremost, let me get your thoughts on this case. This is a tough one. We've already had a hung jury in this case in the previous trial. I can certainly see why. I think reasonable minds certainly could differ with the evidence, but I also think there's enough evidence for a conviction. Where do you fall in this one?
This is a tough one, Michael, and you're right. The reason they had that mistrial the first time around is because there's DNA questions, there's ID questions, there's changes of story. You know, all these things are just incredible fodder for a defense attorney to attack the state's case and raise that reasonable doubt.
What do you think the state is doing now with the questioning of this witness, going through all the other rooms on the 6th floor of the night of the incident?
Yeah, I think she's predicting that the defense is going to try to make an argument that somehow somebody else from another room on the 6th floor somehow came into that room and was the person who raped this woman. So I think she's just getting ahead of the defense's arguments that they might be trying to make.
You know, it's interesting because I wonder, because there's video that shows all the doors. So the video speaks for itself. No one else went in and out of that room at that time. But what you do have is you do have the defendant going into the room. There you see the defendant. He actually left the room. I would imagine his roommate called him and told him, hey, I'm bringing somebody back. Can you give me some privacy? Good roommate says, okay. He's sitting out there for 2 hours. Then he goes in the room, and it's just the 3 of them in the room. To me, that says a lot. So the issue here, I would imagine, must be the credibility of the victim.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the credibility of the victim seems to be the #1 issue for the state here. You know, they've got sort of a muddled DNA results. So that's not really helping them. And at the end of the day, the state needs to put as many pieces of evidence that support their case before that jury so they have a better argument at closing.
All right, what I want to do now, Randolph, I want to listen to the testimony of the victim while she was on the stand. Again, can't say her name, can't show her, but we're going to hear her talk about how her mind, in terms of how she felt at the time of this incident, in terms of how sober she was and how coherent she was. Let's take a listen.
So is it your testimony that you were sober at that point?
I was coherent.
I'm not asking if you were coherent. I'm asking if you believe you were sober.
I don't believe I was 100% sober. I got out of there as fast as I could.
Okay. You walked through the lobby and out of the hotel, right?
Yes, trying to get out of that situation where I'd just been raped.
Okay. You didn't stop and say anything to the concierge?
No, I didn't know them.
Didn't stop and call the police?
No, because I wanted to get to the hospital.
You walked home, though, right?
I did.
That's a tough one. You hear that testimony. We heard testimony earlier today from a toxicologist that at the time she extrapolated back. When she went to the hospital, she was at 0.135, way over the limit, almost double the limit. And if you extrapolate it back with the sort of calculations they do, she could have been as high as a 0.235 at the time of the incident. I think therein lies the biggest problem for prosecutors. How do you deal with that as a prosecutor?
That's tough, Michael, and that's one of the problems I think that the state had the first time around. When you have a victim who is, I wouldn't say lying, but just trying to hide simple facts. I mean, this is an easy answer. Yes, I was intoxicated. Yes, I had a high BAC. Get past it, admit it, and move on to what facts really matter to the state's case.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things you have to do, you're a former prosecutor, if somebody comes to you with a story like this, what you have to do, first and foremost, is determine their credibility. How do you go about doing that? The victim herself, she comes to you, she tells her story. There are some inconsistencies. There may be some things she's saying that don't quite make sense, but all the other factors suggest something happened in that room.
Absolutely. I mean, these are the cases where, as a prosecutor, you almost have to try the case before it even goes to trial in your mind, thinking about every piece of evidence that I have as a prosecutor. What can I prove? What can I present to the jury? How will it play? And then you have to obviously make that decision in light of the victim and the story that she's telling.
Yeah, and in this instance, the prosecutor made it not only once, but twice, because this is the second time that this guy is being tried, being brought back all the way from Ireland. All right, Randolph, stand by. I do need to take a break now. When we return... All right, so that wrapped up the day. The Commonwealth is expected to wrap up its case tomorrow, and then the defense will begin. The jury will hear from the defendant, Terence Crosbie, who has said that he will testify. Still with us is attorney and former prosecutor Randolph Rice. Randolph, I want to ask you about that decision. He testified the first time around, and my point about that testimony is, obviously, you can assume maybe it was a success because he got a hung jury, but again, unless you talk to the jurors, you don't know if everybody wanted to acquit, and then after hearing him testify, a few decided, look, I want to convict, or if it was the other way around. I would imagine he wants to tell his story. He has a story to tell, obviously, and this is one of those cases where I think the jury wants to and perhaps needs to hear from him. What do you think?
I agree, Michael. I think that that's a great observation. You don't know what the jury's thinking. They could have been leaning on the DNA or maybe some of this testimony we heard from the security officer. But at the end of the day, I do think jurors like to hear from the defendant. And I think it actually can help in certain situations, which, arguably it did help in this case.
Here's the other thing. I think he has to explain also. He finds out, they question him about this situation. He becomes aware of the accusation. Then he leaves the United States. Right? So that's something I think he has to explain, because when I read that about this case, the first thing I thought was, oh, he's trying to run away, he's guilty. But perhaps some of the surrounding circumstances suggest he let them know where he was going. He let them know where he lived and how to reach him. Perhaps it wasn't as it seemed.
No, I agree. You've got to have that explanation as to why you took these steps, why you did what you did. To take an earlier flight when there's this suspicion that's in the air, that looks suspicious, and you don't want to look suspicious when you're charged with a crime like this. So, yes, you've got to get up there and explain these sort of irregularities on the defense's part to sort of cover yourself.
And at the same time, you can kind of understand someone wanting to get back on home soil with this type of serious accusation. I can certainly understand that. But again, leaving that information was important. The other person I want to talk about is Liam O'Brien. He was the roommate. Yeah. He was the one that had the situation with the victim that was consensual. According to the testimony, he was passed out throughout this entire thing, but he doesn't want to be involved in the trial. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I think Liam O'Brien not returning to the United States is a huge win for the defense, because this gives that suspicion that maybe somehow he was involved. He could have been the one. Maybe there's some confusion here. So it's helpful to the defense.
Yeah, I would have to agree. All right, Randolph, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're going to take a quick break, but we have this update.